My name is Kevin Collins. I'm the Senior Program Manager for SQL Server CE, which is now SQL Server Mobile Edition. What we're going to be talking about today is basically what's in this new release. We're going to go over various scenarios for people that don't understand how SQL Server CE is used and in what space we use that in. We're going to go over a customer demo, a real-world application that we've already converted over to SQL Server Mobile Edition and show you how that works. And then we're going to go into basically a bunch of demos that extend beyond what we did in the keynote of what's in the SQL Server Mobile release. To start off with, what I want to do is just talk about positioning a SQL Server Mobile Edition and how that relates to other mobility products that Microsoft has to offer. Our primary usage pattern is where someone will sync up a database in a Wi-Fi or broadband type connection and bring down a large database to the device and then leave that well-connected area and then go off and modify and edit data through their application and then sync back up over GPRS or CDMA or some lower bandwidth synchronization to do delta changes back and forth between that database. And then when they come back in to their location where they have a broadband connection, be it Wi-Fi or some other type of broadband connection, they'll sync up again and get more changes going back and forth. That's the primary scenario that we see a lot of our enterprise customers going out and doing. However, there are lots of customers that will go out and just do everything over dial-up. There's another set of customers that will create databases on compact flash cards or SD cards, send them out with an auto install, and have the application and database install off of that. There's some other mobility platforms that are available for people to use. This kind of goes over the choosing talk a little bit that we had earlier right after Bill G's keynote, but I wanted to go over these just one more time in case someone wasn't in that particular session. The first form of mobility that we have available is mobile web forms. This is something that shipped with Visual Studio.NET 2003 and gives people that have a wide variety of devices the ability to connect up and get to one central source of data. So what this is it goes through ASP.NET, and depending on what device hits that web page, it will automatically morph to the screen and file and screen size that you have on your device and render that page. So you don't have to do any work on the back end. So if you're going across devices that are Palm, BlackBerry RIM devices, WAP-enabled phones, all of these can access the same web page and it'll automatically morph to have the data to fit onto that particular device. So this is very nice if you have a variety of users that have a variety of different devices. Some of the drawbacks is, one, it's always connected. So there's no connected, disconnected mode that you have on this. So if you go in a disconnected state, application's broke. You can't cache data off and be offline and then come back online and get to this data. The second potential drawback is if you're only going to be using a Pocket PC device, the rich GUI that you'd have by doing a VS app isn't going to be available to you through this type of application. So since it kind of has a baseline behavior across all devices, it doesn't take advantage of all the GUI controls that you'd have in VS. So those are some trade-offs that you'd have on that. So if you're in always a well-connected and you have a wide variety of devices, this is a very good mobile technology to be using to get to data that's on a back-end server. The next type of mobility access that I like to talk about is ADO.NET. This is a subset of what you have on the desktop for data access, but it comes with the .NET Compact framework. A lot of people will use this with web services. So they'll have a web service sitting there. They'll take a data set from that web server, bring it down to the device, and then bring it up through a data set and get access to it on the form, make changes to it, and then send that data set back up to that web service. This is a very good technology if you're going to be getting to a variety of disparate data sources that you want to be able to pool together through your web service and then bring that data down. If you have smaller amounts of data, this is a very good type of application to be using. You can store data and make it persistent into an XML file that you could put onto your storage card and then bring that back into a data set, make changes, and then send it back up to your web service. The drawback on this is that you don't have the ability to do like multi-table joins, any complex SQL statements. Also, if you start getting to larger data sets with this, you're going to start to notice a performance degradation. Now we're going to go into this. There's a talk tomorrow on .NET Compact Framework and SQL Server CE and optimization tips and tricks that you might want to go to that talks a little bit more about this and all that. Another big drawback is if you're going to do any types of sync, you're going to have to write sync logic in your middle tier where your web service is and on your back end so you can be able to sync that data back and forth. Thirdly, there's no compression and there's no encryption when you're storing this data on the device. Those are all some potential fallbacks that you might have that might be a reason not to use this. Its strongest area is if you're doing small data and you're getting to a whole variety of different disparate data sets. It's a very good technology to use. The last one is SQL Server CE, which is what we're going to focus this talk on. The nice things about SQL Server CE is that you can have multiple tables in your database. You can do multi-table joins, basically do all the complex SQL statements that you can do in SQL Server. You also have very fast access when you're going against large databases, something that you won't see if you go against a data set. In addition to this, you have some very compelling features that have to do with sync. So what we're going to show later when we show a customer demo is that with one line of code, you can do a sync. So the dot synchronizes the managed code that will bring data back and forth and synchronize the data automatically for you without you having to write any tracking code in the middle tier, the back-end server, on the device. Also, if you're going over a slow connection like GPRS or CDMA, we'll automatically do compression so that that transfer can go faster. And if you're concerned about security, we'll encrypt the database on the device using RSA 128-bit encryption. And going to IIS, we can go through an HTTPS connection, which is also using RSA 128-bit encryption. So if it's a real-time enterprise-type application where you need to have data sensitivity and you want to get the utmost performance with the least amount of code, this is a very good solution to utilize if you're going to be on Microsoft platforms. So what we're going to talk about is just kind of going off the keynote today, is that we've rebranded SQL Server CE to be SQL Server 2005 Mobile Edition. The reason we're doing this is we're supporting additional platforms, which I'm going to get a little bit later. But the key thing about this in this feature release is that we have tight integration with the tools. This is some of the stuff you saw in the keynote today. We have integration in with Visual Studio 2005 and in with SQL Server 2005. In addition to that, we took a lot of feedback from developers and put in a lot of performance improvements, which we're going to show demos on here, with the same amount of code and kind of dispelling the whole issues with data sets going against SQL Server CE. So the first thing I want to do is show a customer application that we've ported over to SQL Server Mobile Edition. This application was originally written in Visual Studio.NET 2003 with VB.NET. This application is a real estate application that's used for all the multiple listing, for a lot of multiple listing services across the United States. The one we're going to be demonstrating is for the one in St. Augustine's, Florida. The way this application works is we're going to pretend I'm a real estate agent and you guys are out here looking for houses to buy for winter homes in the Florida area. So as a real estate agent, the first thing I'm going to do is I'd purchase the software from the regional multiple listing service. I would install the application, and the very first thing I do is I cradle my device, and the real estate agents typically have their desktop computer hooked up on a broadband connection. When I do my initial cradle, I'm going to start the app up, and I'm going to bring down the area of data that I'm working in, so whatever regional multiple listing. In this instance, it's St. Augustine's, Florida. I'll bring that down, and it'll bring down the entire schema, all the referential integrity, and all the data for my section of multiple listing. In this instance, it's St. Augustine's, Florida. This particular database is 20 meg in size, which we're going to be showing and how fast the access is. At that point, I would disconnect my device, and I would leave the premise and start looking at houses with you guys at St. Augustine's to see what particular houses we want to look at. What you see here is there's a bunch of stuff in this architecture diagram, and one of them here is notification services. So what I have the ability to do as a real estate agent is I can go up with my front end application, and I can go to a front end web page. And what this is going to do is it's going to say, I want to be notified when I'm on the road with my phone edition device when any new listings come in. Now this is a live thing here. This is going to hit a back-end SQL server that's sitting at my house and insert a row. Normally this would be data coming from an Oracle database, but to simulate this, when I do this, I'm going to put in a row. It's going to translate out and send an SMS message through notification services. Notification services is the same thing that drives MSN Mobile when you get your sports scores and stuff like that, and you get, you set up what teams you want to track and weather for your area. Those are all that's all driven from notification services on SQL Server. So we're using the same technology that they're using. So what I can do is I can go here and click Submit, and it's submitted off a listing. Now, depending on how fast this SMS is going to come, will determine how fast that'll come to the device. So eventually, we're going to see a SMS message come up on the device. It's going to notify me in a new real estate. And that's it right there. So what I'm going to do is just let this die down here for a second so it minimizes, because I want to get back to this message. It takes about a second. And this all happened. I'm live on this device. So I have a real live connection, and I'm hooked up over GPRS. I'm running this on a PPC 2003, a Pocket PC Phone Edition 2003, so I'm live on this whole demo. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a general search. So we can come through, and I noticed today that the stock market was up dramatically. So that means that you guys probably have a lot of money to be spending for a vacation home in Florida. So what we're going to do is search for houses that are definitely in your price range. And what we should do is come up with 17 houses. So you can see there's 17 results that came up for the St. Augustine, Florida area. Now, looking out in the crowd, I can see that some people are probably interested in prices in this range, just a little over $1 million. And what we're doing is, this is all, again, this database is in SQL Server Mobile, and everything was just converted. I didn't change any code. I just took the code over and resynced my database, and I'm running live. So it's a very easy conversion. So we have multiple listing data located here. I can get directions to where the house is. I can get remarks for the school district. So if you have kids and you want them to be able to go to year-round school, we know where we could get in for that vacation home. And probably the most interesting thing is we can look at the down payment. So for a mere $6,270 a month for mortgage payment, you can have the house and only $56,000. And I'll split some of my commission with you to help that down payment. So the coolest thing is, boom, we get this image data. So what this image data is stored in our SQL Server Mobile database, and through the streaming, we're able to bring that right out of our database and into this picture control. And you can see how fast it is when we're doing direct access like this into SQL Server Mobile database. So you guys are looking at this picture and you're saying, well, if I'm going to move to Florida, Kevin, I kind of want something that's on the water. So what we can do is I can look here and I can see this SMS message. And I can see that it's on Seaside Boulevard, and I happen to know that that boulevard is on houses that are on water. So what we can do is we have information that there's a new listing that just came up. So we're the very first people to know about this while we're traveling around. But you guys are saying you want to see the house because you don't like my house pick that I had here. So what we can do is close this, and I can come back here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to come back up, and I'm going to sync. So what's going to happen is right now we're going live over GPRS back to the server that I have at my house. And while this is syncing, what I want to do is show you this architecture diagram again so you can see what's going on while this is syncing. So the first time when we came in, we cradled the device, and we did an initial subscription. We're using merge replication on this. So we have the database sitting here on SQL Server. We created a publication. I'm going to go through doing this a little bit later in the talk. We brought down the entire database through IIS, through the desktop, over into here. It's a 20 meg database. One line of code created everything that was basically a replica of this database over to here. We could do subsetting of data if we so desired. Then we went out in the field. I put in a web page request. A new row was added into the SQL Server. It triggered a notification, and it sent an SMS message back to the device, which we saw. Now we're out in the field. I'm not connected to the desktop anymore, and we're doing a GPRS connection, and I'm coming through, and I'm looking at this, and I'm going up here to SQL Server to see if there's any changes. Well, there was one new row added in, and that new row with its associated pictures are going to come down to the device. If I had made changes on the device, those changes would automatically get pushed back up to that back-end server. So what we're going to do is, this is finished. And you can see that it's synced. And I have one change. So I can come back in and we can search again. And now you'll see there's 18 rows instead of 17 rows. So we got that one row down over GPRS. There's no wires attached to this thing. It's live. It's always dangerous doing GPRS stuff in a room, let me tell you. And what we can do is come to this new house that's listed here. So we can bring up the multiple listing information, come and do the directions. It's a little bit more in price, but it's something that I think you guys are interested in once you see this picture. There it is. So we can have the picture. There's water. Here's Kevin, your real estate agent, with his coming to visit you with your jet ski, and I'm going out on it while your kids and you guys are playing around in your winter home. So this is showing a total application. It's a real shipping application through Nevalon. So, and we converted it over, or I converted it over to SQL Server Mobile Edition. So that's one real-world app that shows a very good example of how SQL Server is used out in an enterprise-type class of application. So next thing, there is one piece that I wanted to show you. And that's the code. Boy, it's taken a while for VS to... The question is with notification services, how do I send the SMS? And there's plugins that come with notification services that have when I set up notification services, there's triggers that go on to SQL Server. Those triggers go to notification services, and then I have a plugin that goes to SMS. So I have an SMS provider that my notification services at my house sends to, and that plugs out to these phone numbers. So when I keyed in my information on that web screen, I had my cell phone number. It takes that cell phone number and sends it out. We have our own SMS provider that we hook up to. So I send an SMS message to that with the phone number and the text that I want, and it'll come to my phone, just over GSM. So that's that. I can dig into it a little bit more afterward. So the thing that I wanted to show here is the code behind this. This line of code did all that work, the .synchronize method. There's some properties that I set before that identify what the server name is, what my internet URL is, and different properties that go along with security to get into my backend SQL Server and to get authentication in my IIS box. But this is the code right here that does all the work. So the very first time I did this, I had an empty database. It brought down all the schema, all the data, created that 20 meg database. The second time I called this .synchronize method, it saw the schema was there and that I had made no changes on the device. It then went up to the server and said, what are the new changes? And it brought down that new row of information that I had right down to this device. And then we requeried it and saw that there was 18 rows and got that new picture information. Next thing I want to talk about is really diving into SQL Server Mobile Edition. So in the keynote, we talked about new devices that we're going to be supporting. So what I want to do is kind of go over what devices we are supporting in its entirety. So we're going to support the Pocket PC 2003 and edition. So that's both Pocket PC and the Phone Edition device. And we'll support the future release of SQL Server of Windows Mobile Edition. So that's the future release. The interesting thing that we have here is for plan of record for that, SQL Server CE will be in ROM. So that's the same idea that you have now with the Pocket PC 2003 device. You have the .NET Compact Framework in ROM. The core components of SQL Server Mobile Edition will also be in ROM on those future Windows mobile devices. The other big thing that we have for support is for smartphone. So this is the future version of Windows Mobile that we have in smartphone. So it will be a future version of that, and SQL Server Mobile will also be in ROM for that. In this, we'll also support the next release of Windows CE.NET, which is codenamed Macallan. The big announcement that we have, in addition to smartphone, is the ability to support tablet PC. So this will be, all this support will only come through Visual Studio 2005. So you have to have Visual Studio 2005, which is the product we ship in, to be able to get to these. What this allows you to do, instead of having MSDE on your tablet PC, and SQL Mobile on your Pocket PC or smartphone, you'll be able to have the same database on both those devices. So to help you understand that, one of our customers, Kraft Nabisco, has truck delivery. They use truck delivery on ruggedized symbol devices that they'll go out, and that database is used for the truck drivers. However, that same database is used for the account reps who use tablet PCs so that when they go to visit the account, they can take orders, they might deliver some product, but they'll also want to have the bigger screen and higher CPU to be able to show like Britney Spears videos and other product launch videos that they're showing that go around their products. So in that, those customers want to have the same APIs that go back and forth and all that. So that's a very important feature, and the tablet PC is something that we just announced here at this conference. The question is what about laptops? Right now, the product is hardware restricted to just run on tablet PCs. You will be able to develop, if you have Visual Studio 2005, you'll be able to develop and dev and test on a desktop machine, but it will not run on its own unless it's on a tablet PC. We can go on. I can answer those questions after if we want, but that's what our executives have decided for our product right now. The question is no. The question is this SQL Server Mobile? And it is SQL Server Mobile. We support x86 CPU, so it runs native Win32. The question is, if laptop, then your solution would be Microsoft MSDE as your database on a notebook or laptop computer. SQL Mobile or run on tablet PCs. That's a Win32 platform. I can answer these questions in more detail at the end, so we'll continue on. The other thing that's a major differentiator between the previous versions of SQL Server and this SQL Server Mobile is that we've componentized the product out. Before, everything was one monolithic DLL. So before, the OLEDB provider was one monolithic DLL in conjunction with the storages and the QP. What we've done is separated this out to help reduce footprint. So what we've done is if you're going to go through native, be it C++, which is going to be supported natively in Visual Studio 2005, you have the OLEDB provider that you'd go through to get to that. So you'd have C++ going to OLEDB CE to get to SQL Server mobile databases. If you're going to be going through the managed stack, we've removed the OLEDB provider. Before, you still went through that, and we call natively in to our native query processor if you're going to be using the full product. However, if you want, you can directly access the storage engine. So if you had a device where the product wasn't in ROM and you wanted to reduce your footprint, you could just ship our bottom part, our storage engine, which is 300 KB in size, and access it like an ISAM without having the QP. So some people, especially in the embedded arena, might find this to be an interesting option to be able to use. Now what I would do is go into features that we have into each major category that we listed in that previous slide. The first thing is multi-user support. How many people are already using SQL Server CE today? Okay. How many people have a frustration that when they know what like you can't background sync while the database is open, and you have to always open and close. You can't have two applications. So we've taken that feedback quite seriously and have implemented that so it's a true multi-user database now. So now you can have your app open, leave the database connection open, and have a background sync that you could kick off every 5 minutes or whatever you want, and then keep that data up to date. You could also have, like what Kraft Nabisco wants, is 2 applications running on the Pocket PC that hit the same database. So they have a sales application and they have a delivery application, and depending on what person is using the device, they might have both up at the same time. The next thing that we did is we rewrote the entire storage engine from the ground up. So the key thing here is some people have complained that people warm boot their device and they get the database in a suspect state where they have to compact the database to be able to open the database again. What we've done is change the way that we do transactions and rewrote them in such a way that when we're committing a transaction, we have 2 sets of pages in the database, almost like shadow paging. And as the transaction is going, we'll put in the modified or new pages that are part of the transaction log if you want. And then we'll start committing them up. And once we get to the very top page, basically what we'll do is flip a bit that's atomic. And when we flip that bit, you're either on the new set of transactions or in the old set of transactions. This is a different way than how we did it in the previous version of the SQL Server CE. This pretty much guarantees that you're never going to have that database is in a suspect state and need to compact the database. Another real interesting thing that we have here that people have complained about is with the previous version of the SQL Server CE, if we put in a lot of data and then deleted it and then put in a lot of data, or just keep putting it in and then deleting it, you'd see the database go like this, but you never really see it shrink down. We would previously reuse pages in the database, but we'd never shrink the database until you compacted the database. With SQL Server Mobile, what we'll do is we have a background thread that will automatically, any empty pages, we'll get rid of them so your file size will come down as a background thread. Obviously, as a developer, you can invoke that so it happens more frequently than what our background thread is, and you'll still have the ability to compact the database to get it in its most compact state like you're used to with the existing versions of SQL Server CE. The other feedback that we got from developers was they had queries that would particularly run slow. You know, so there'd be this scenario or this scenario where there might not have been a proper index, but the query would run slow on the device. And there was no way to go in and be able to manipulate that query, nor was there a way to figure out what its query plan was. So as part of the keynote, you've seen that for the people that were in the keynote, where we added the capability where you can see a query plan, and we can put in optimization hints just like you can with SQL Server on the desktop or on the server to be able to go and change that. So you can put in what index order you want, what table order you want, etc. The other thing that we put in since we rewrote the storage engine is we put in histogram support, just like SQL Server has. So we'll track statistics on how close together data pages are, what the cardinality of those data pages are, so that the query optimizer can get a much better plan by looking at your database to come up with the best performance result. The other thing that we added in was what we call the SQL CE result set. This is something that you guys will be very appreciative of because it eliminates the need to have the data set, still have the functionality that you have the data set with significant performance improvements. And we're going to show some demos on that here in a second. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip back to this screen. I'm going to close out this application and show you another one that's utilizing the SQL CE result set. Now the application that I'm going to be showing you guys is an address book application. This is the global address book for Microsoft. So I have about 55,000 entries in this database that's for our Microsoft access, or for our Microsoft GAL that we got from Microsoft Exchange. The first thing I'm going to do is go with the data set. So what I'm going to do is key in an alias. I need that focus. I'm going to key in an alias of one of our program managers that's on our team. Now what you can see is it came through and it did this in 4.7 seconds using the data set. So it's going through and it's constantly, every time, going and seeking through, like using a like clause, so B and then BR, then BRAN. You saw how slow it was. It's about 5 seconds. Now if I come through and I change this to using our SQL CE result set, using the same exact QP syntax, I can retype this guy's name back in. And you can see it's 0.7 seconds. So in this instance, depending on how the data is cached, I was about 5 times faster than I was before. Significant performance improvements for anyone that's had issues with the data set. Has anyone experienced performance issues with using the data set with SQL CE? So we have some people in the back. So this is a very big godsend to the developers out there. And the best thing about this is that you can bind this to the data grid just like you can with the data set. So all the functionality in terms of binding that you have with the data set, you can do this. The other thing is that's directly updatable. Whereas the data set, you had to post the changes. You can directly update this without going to a SQL statement and bring that code right back in. So this is a very exciting feature that we have in terms of performance. The next thing I'm going to talk about is tool integration. So this is some of the stuff that we talked about in the keynote demo. The first thing is SQL Workbench integration. SQL Workbench is the new name for the replacement for Enterprise Manager that shipped with SQL Server 2000. So this is a feature, a new tool set that comes with SQL Server 2005 that allows you to now manipulate a database on the device or on your desktop using this tool. This is something that you only could use iSQL WCE before to get to this. The other thing we did is we put in tool support for data transformation services so that we could bring data from disparate data sources without going through SQL Server and bring it right down to a SQL CE database. Now, there's not synchronization capabilities of tracking changes, but a lot of people just wanted to get a set of data from like a JET or Oracle database into a static table in SQL CE, and this is a very quick way for them to do that. The other thing that we've added in is Win32 support. So with this, there's a couple scenarios that people were really struggling with the previous versions. One scenario was database deployment. So a perfect example is a company that does Salesforce automation, or field service automation. So one particular company we've been working with does this where they track parts of an airplane and then they send their technicians out to maintain and do maintenance on these airplanes. There's about 100,000 parts that are in some of these airplanes. And the database is roughly around 120 meg in size that they have to copy down to a SD or compact flash card. Now, the only way that they could make these databases before was to put the application on the device and hook up a Wi-Fi or something like that, and then create the databases on the device, take the SD card out, and then make copies of it, and then make it to a whole bunch of other SD cards, and then they could send it out to the field for updates. Well, obviously, lots of people weren't happy about that because then you're tied to the performance that you have of the device and the connection speed. What you really want to do is use the performance that you have on your desktop to be able to create these databases. So for these particular scenarios, for scaling and deployment, you can now create an application where you can create a large database on the desktop through your Visual Studio 2005 application, where you can just create a database. The other type of scenario is if I'm going to roll out like 2,000 to 5,000 devices or even 1,000 devices, there's always a question on how many CPUs I need to have on my back-end server, how many server CPUs I need to have on my IIS box, and how do I need to scale this out so that when I deploy and all 1,000 people sync at relatively the same time, am I going to crash and burn? Well, up until this time, you basically had to buy about 1,000 devices. We do have a special agreement if people are doing scaling where we can, if you have that need, you can come see me after and I can get you a special licensing agreement that will allow you to do this in Visual Studio 2003. But in our SQL Mobile, we'll have a EULA restriction that will allow you to do this so that what you can do is create a one Win32 application that does the same thing that you do on your device for syncing. And you could have about maybe 50 to 60 of those XEs run on a couple high-end machines and then simulate what it would be like on stress for your back-end server and your IIS box if you had like 100 or 200 or 300 people syncing within a second or 2 seconds or all at the same time. So this definitely is something that you could very cheaply come out and figure out what your scaling requirements are going to be able to do sync. The next really exciting thing is integration with Visual Studio 2005. And we showed some of that in the keynote. So this is a list of what we're doing, but what I'd rather do is go and show you that in a little bit more detail. I think it's this box. So what we have is just a blank screen of Visual Studio 2005. Now, previously with Visual Studio .NET 2003, you had no integration with SQL Server CE databases. In fact, you could create a mobile project and then you had to right-click and add a reference for SQL Server CE, everything that we're doing in the lab at the end of the hall. Plus, you could never manage it. So what I want to show is just going through here and adding a connection. I can come in, and some of the new stuff that's in here is I could say I want to do a SQL Server CE database. I want to go to a existing connection so I can browse to this database, test the connection, click OK, And what I'm going to do is I'll have an expanded view where I can manipulate and modify the data. So I can open up this, use some new features that are in Visual Studio 2005, page the data this way. And the best thing is I can now go in and directly edit the data and manipulate it. So I can come in here and say, and come and save it. Now for me, this is a godsend, because before I always had to use remote display on iSQL WCE off my notebook or off my Pocket PC to be able to change any data. Unless I wanted to write an app, I had no way of doing any kind of keyboard stuff. So now I can actually get to my data and change it. We're going to show you how you can do this also through SQL Server 2005. So this is really cool functionality that you have here. You can also go in and manipulate the schema if you wanted to, and you could do this all without having to buy SQL Server tools to have on your desktop. You can just do this through the SQL or Visual Studio 2005. Now, to me, the best part comes when we create a project. So if we come in and create a project, just like we did in the keynote, you can come in, and eventually what we'll most likely have is on this wizard, we'll have a thing here for tablet PC. So we're still working out where we're going to have that, but it'll most likely be in this, so that you could have multiple UIs going against one database class. So in your solution, you'd have a smartphone UI, a tablet PC UI, a Pocket PC UI, but you'd have one database access class that they could all get to. But they would all, so you could deploy to all three separate things, but have one database class and have one central way to get to your data through all those different platforms. So for this, what we're going to do is just create an application, just like you would in VisualStudio.net. There's nothing that's really changed. The nice thing about this is this form is static, so it makes it a little bit more difficult for people to want to resize the form and get that messed up so it scrolls. And I do not like the default that's on here, so I always change this minimize box. If people don't know why I do that, is if you see the OK symbol, it closes down the app. If you have an X, it minimizes it. And people, it's extremely hard to bring that back up. You have to go to Control Panel, Memory, and then say activate that particular app. So it's never intuitive to the user on how to bring that back up. So this is all standard for what we have. Now, what's new in Visual Studio 2005 is this new data wizard. So what this does is it'll walk me through. I can say data wizard for various things. Bill Gates did the business object. I can choose the existing data connection that I already created. You can come through and bring up a list of tables. And for this, we'll just click customers and orders. And what it's going to do is create an XSD file that Visual Studio can then use as schema reference to bring this stuff into the application. So if I come back here, we can look at the XSD file. I can double click on it. And in this instance, I can add in a relationship. I don't have referential integrity defined on this, so I can add a primary key, foreign key. And what this is going to do is allow me to do one-to-many relationships automatically without writing code on my form. So I'm going to save this XSD so I can reference it in the project, come back to the data sources, and come back to the forms. Now, how many people have used VS in doing data to SQL CE? So only a handful of people. So that's just a little bug that you don't need to worry about. This build is Friday's build, and this is very new. As of Friday was the first time that we could actually do this. So what I've just done, which you could never do before, is I dragged a table over, and it created a data grid, and it automatically has the data bound. Now, is that cool or what? Come. No, to me, it's my favorite thing of the whole product is this integration. My other really cool thing is I love this docking feature. So I can dock and have it automatically come up. I don't have to size the form. The other cool thing is I can go in, and since we define that relationship, it automatically brings up a table, the orders table, that says, okay, this is the many side. And I'll automatically create another data grid that comes on here, and then will allow me to come in and I can dock this onto the bottom. So I've written no code. Before, anyone that's done anything always knew that You know, you had to go in here and add in the SQL Server CE reference and add in all the references that you wanted. This new data connection wizard does everything for you. So we finally have parity to what you could do with SQL Server on the desktop. So for me, I always dreaded having to do a new project because I always had to manually do everything because I hated using the data set because of the performance issues. So I always had to manually bind my table direct results into this into the grids. So what we're going to do is just build this, and I'm going to uncradle my device down here and switch this device over. And click to deploy. Okay, and go back to the Elmo device. And what we have here is a working Toshiba, not the one that was not working in Bill G's keynote. And you can see that I have the entire data grid. I wrote no code. No code. It automatically filled this up. So the other really cool thing is I can switch between, and it does the one-to-many relationship. So you see the data changing down below. I can also change this data or automatically update it to the database. If this was a subscriber database, I could then sync that information back up. So very cool stuff that you can do with absolutely no code. So for me, this is like my favorite feature, and I'm still very excited about it because I just got this on Friday. So that's why you had the little encrypted build stuff that came up. So this is all stuff that you guys will be able to play with when the Visual Studio 2005 beta comes out. Not all of this stuff is hooked up into the build that you guys got on your on the CDs that you had on your stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's hooked up with SQL Server Mobile, but not this drag and drop stuff. So it's coming soon. How many people like that? All right. So the next thing that I want to show you guys is the ability to go through SQL Workbench. So on this is SQL Workbench. So this is SQL Server 2005, the Tool Edition. This is the replacement for Enterprise Manager that you had with SQL Server. This is what you do to manage your local or your server-side databases and change the schema and add publications. What we can do now is we have integration with SQL Server Mobile to go in and create databases. So on here, I could say Browse for More. And if I had an ActiveSync connection onto here, it would go through ActiveSync, and I could choose my mobile device that I was ActiveSync to, and I could create the database on that device. Or I can just go here and say New Database, and come through and say I want to overwrite it. And like that, I have a database on my desktop. So, you know, again, no code to create it, something that we could never really do before unless you wanted to use that iSQL WCE tool. You can see here we have the full support that you'd have if it was a normal server database. And something new that we have is creating subscriptions. So I'm going to come back and show that to you. Well, actually, I'm going to go through and show it to you right now. Where I can come through and create this subscription, what we can do is choose a database that I already have on here, connect to it, and choose an existing publication. I can come through, oops, this, I didn't want to do that. What I did is I just pushed my fat, stubby finger onto the internet URL and lost my internet URL. Oh. So let's see if I can call it back up here. Okay. This is it. Yes. Come back to the wizard, key this in. What that is that's the IIS box that I have on the server where our middle tier ISAPI DLL is running, and that's what I connect to. So if I was, when we're on my device, my GPRS connection went to an IIS box that was at my house, and this demoed the IIS box and SQL Server is on this notebook. So I can choose how I want to connect to this. And my favorite thing is the ability now is all the code that was generated, I can copy and paste this. So another big complaint that we had was people were saying, you know, I can't figure out all the properties that I need to set. So what we did is take all the properties and everything that we did that's going to make this subscription database on my desktop, you can copy and paste it in whatever language you want, put it in your app, and boom, it's just going to run because it's the exact same thing that ran here in the desktop. There's nothing that's going to be different. So you can see the properties that we set up that were prompted to me through the wizard, and then this is just the synchronize method that I have. So everything that's here, I can copy and paste and go. So again, get automatic sync on my device without writing any code, and do those things that I have in Visual Studio that bring up the data, and I can have an application out in about 5 minutes. So I can click here, and what's happening here is you see the percentage bar that comes across there. What's very interesting about that is we now, to the developer, provide callbacks. We have managed callbacks, so when you're doing synchronization, it will tell you how far along we are in that sync. So there's, a lot of people would do sync over GPRS, and they'd try to bring down like 10 meg or something of data and delta changes, and the user would get tired and they'll sit and warm boot the device, and then they never get their sync, and they'll complain that the device was hanging. Kind of like what it's wanting to do right now. It worked in the keynote. So there we are. I must not. I have no idea why it took that long. I can guarantee you, if we run it again, it won't take that long. So now what we have is we've created that subscription. If I refresh, I can come through and I see all the tables that are in here. So now let's get to the next step of where there's a lot of developer pain. A lot of people have developer pain with SQL Server CE in the sense that they cannot modify figure out what's going on for a query plan. So here I can connect to this database that we just synced to. I can put in a query that's going to do a join. And I can get to the data and look at it. Again, this is something I could never do before. Now what's really cool about this is I can come in and I can say I want to see the actual query plan. And now what I'll get is a little tab down here that I can see the GUI show plan just like I can against SQL Server. So I can go through, see what all the properties are. Now what's nice about this is if I see something on properties like it's doing an index scan and I want to do a table scan, and instead I can go in and put optimization hints to change this behavior. Now we're doing this on the desktop. Behavior is different when it's on the device. So you could see that it's fast here on your desktop, but when the user's out there in the field running it on their device, they're complaining that the query is slow. So a really nice thing that you can do in addition to this is in your code, you could set like a profiling option. And in that profiling option, the user could click it, and what you can do is say set statistics. And then I can come down and say select show plan. Turn this off. So in your code, if a user decided, if something is running slow, you could have an option in your code that say, okay, I want a profile. And when you profile, you could have it on a particular query. You can execute. You'd execute this command. Then the user would execute the normal SQL statement. And then I can execute this command, which puts out a XML document. And all the stuff that's here that puts these GUI plans is all XML under SQL Workbench. So everything that comes from SQL Server or SQL CE gets brought back to XML, and that's what renders the GUI. So on my device, I can capture the XML, output it to a file, or stick it into like an n-text column on my database, and then sync it back up, drag it off of my SQL Server on the back end, and rename this file to say SQL plan, drag it onto my desktop, and I'll see the show plan GUI. So I can see what's going out on the field right back into here. So that's very cool stuff that you can do to get on-site diagnostics for doing performance optimization. So that's something that is really cool on that. The other thing that I want to do is just go through and show something real quick here in terms of a lot of people think that it's hard to do synchronization. But what I want to do is just go through here and just create a new publication. And we can time this to see how long it's going to take. And I'll come through We already have a publication in the Northwinds database, and this is the wizard that ships with SQL Server 2005. And what we're going to do is just create another publication and then bring it into our existing SQL Server CE database. So I'm going to come to the wizard. In this instance, I'm just going to bring in the shippers table. I could choose what tables I want to have in my publication to bring down. So this is what stuff I want to bring down to my device. I click Next. I don't want to have any filtering. And I'm going to finish. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a publication, which in this instance we call Northwind 1. I wanted to call it Shippers, but I didn't change that. And it's going to go ahead and create all this, and it's going to create a snapshot. For some reason, this machine is running slower than normal. And what we'll do is, once this is created, we're going to do a new feature that's also in SQL Mobile Edition, and that's the ability to bring multiple subscription databases or multiple publications into one subscription database. So in this, we're going to demonstrate how we created two publications and bring it into one database. Before, you could only have one database per publication. So if you had them split apart for performance optimizations, you would have to have separate databases to do that. And in this, what we're going to do, and I can see I'm getting myself in trouble on whatever's going on in this machine, is once this is, I have IIS installed on this XP machine, SQL Server 2005. So there was an additional step that I did do that created all of that. So that's all I had to do. It's just another wizard that creates this virtual directory on the IIS box here that allows the client to talk to IIS and IIS to talk to the SQL Server 2005 publication. So that's the only part that I didn't show on this. So this thing actually did complete. Why it's going as slow as it is, I can't tell you. So what we're going to do now is create a new subscription. And I'm hoping my snapshot has already been created. We'll connect up. This is that second one that just has the shippers table in it. Come through, and you give it a name of shippers. Connect anonymously. Use my essay. Again, I have the code for it. It hasn't published. It hasn't published the snapshot agent yet, so we just have to wait for it to publish that. If I wanted to, we can go into here to management. And what it's going to do is create what had happened here is I'm not on a domain. I'm not on my Redmond domain. So I'm trying to create a new publication, and it wants the credentials for me to be on my Redmond domain in order for me to do this. And since I disconnected my notebook, I'm no longer authenticated on the Redmond domain that I have, and it needs that authentication to create the snapshot. So it can't create the snapshot, so I can't bring that down. So because I'm not on the Redmond domain, I'm getting messed up on that. So we'll go back to the demo, and we'll go past that. So the next thing I wanted to show was DTS. So on DTS support, this is where we're going to be able to go through and show the application going against the JET database. So a lot of people want to get data from Oracle or DB2, but the only way that they've been able to do this in this framework before was to somehow get that data in the SQL Server and then bring that data down. That was one way, or you could write an XML web service, bring the data down to a data set, and input that data. Anyone that's tried doing large amounts of data through a web service and then bringing it into SQL CE has found out that it's a painfully slow experience because basically what we're doing is almost triple buffering the data. The fastest way to get data into SQL CE up to this point would be using either remote data access or merge replication. It's the fastest way to get data in unless you want to do stuff in C++ and go through our table command direct. We do go into performance optimizations on the talk tomorrow. So what I'm going to show here is just the ability to go in, and on here I'm going to bring up this dialog box, and I'm just deleting rows. I could have other types of business logic on this. And this is accessing the SQL CE data, or the SQL mobile database that's sitting here on my desktop that I've already created. So I'm just going to, what that's doing is it's just going to delete an application. I can then look at the data flow, and on this data flow, I can look at the OLEDB source, and my OLEDB source in this instance is a Northwind database. It's a JET database from the NDB file extension. I can then look at my destination database, which is a SDF database that I've already created. So if I come back to control, I can click Start. And what we'll see is they have color coding that goes on here. So it'll go from yellow to green, saying that when it's starting up, it's going to delete the rows that are in this customer DTS table. Then it's going to select the rows from the JET database and then bring them into SQL CE that's in this desktop database. So very cool stuff that I can do. Once I've created this DTS package, I can then reference this DTS package in Visual Studio 2005 and be able to have it so it's automatable. So that's very cool stuff that I can do in terms of connectivity on getting to other data sources. Now granted, there's no tracking here, so I can't track changes back and forth, but it's a very quick way to get data into my SQL mobile database. So how many people think they could use that feature in anything that they're wanting to do? Okay, great. So what we talked about already was synchronization, and I went ahead and did some of the demos because it flowed with that a little bit better. One of the key things that we have with synchronization in SQL Server Mobile Edition is that we're taking advantage of a lot of features that are in Yukon, or SQL Server 2005, which was codenamed Yukon. Some of the big things that we have on there are directly attributable to people that are doing large scaling deployments. So people like Kraft Nabisco that are doing 2,000 scaling deployments, we happen to find issues that were there that we're going to go into in the talk tomorrow that we're fixing in the SQL Server 2005 release. Those are direct things that allow us to get much better scaling optimization. So in a lot of instances, you might be able to drop from 4 CPUs to 3 CPUs if you have thousands of devices. So these are directly attributable things that are on that. We've talked about progress notifications that we showed in the wizard before where we're taking advantage of them. That's all managed code, and you can get to that same managed code to do your own kind of progress notifications when you're syncing. We almost showed the multiple subscriptions in one database. If I wouldn't have been smart and tried to create 2 publications. You saw in the keynote we had 2 publications in there. We didn't do this, but I thought it'd be cooler to show you guys how easy it would be to create a publication. So that does work where we can do that. Another key thing that we have is the ability to control compression. So right now we do a set fixed compression rate between the IIS box and the device. That's fine for general scenarios, but for people like one of our customers, Kraft Nabisco, they sync always over Wi-Fi. So they don't really need any compression because they're going over an 11 megabit pipe. But other people that are in the field that are using GPRS might want to have more compression. So obviously the more compression there is, the more CPU cycles that are going on the IIS box and on the device. So what we're allowing the developer to do is on a per connection basis control what level of compression they have. So like Kraft Nabisco can say, hey, I'm in a Wi-Fi environment, which is something new that you'll see in the .NET Compact Framework 2.0 talk. There's the ability to find out what kind of connection you have, if it's Wi-Fi, if it's GPRS. And from that, you could control with this what type of sync you want, what kind of compression level. So if you come back and it says GPRS, you can say, I want maximum compression. If it comes back and it says Wi-Fi, you can say, I want 0 compression. So this is a way to get optimal performance scaling on that IIS box and more performance on your device because you could be taking up less CPU activity. Another thing that people have complained about is if they leave out of range while they're in the middle of a sync, it'll come back and it'll seem like it's hung. It can go up to 2 minutes while we sit there and try to retry to get back into that connection. Well, there's all sorts of pros and cons, and what we've done is saying, okay, we hear people that want it short, people that want it long, and people are pissed whenever we change it. So what we've done is just give the developer total control on how long that connection retry is. So as a developer, if you want it to be short, you can have it short. If you want it to be long, you can have it long, and we're getting out of the business of trying to figure out what's the best thing that you guys want to have. So those are all really cool features that are there on the sync architecture. Our overall architecture is very similar to what we had in previous releases. There's nothing that's really changed or modified on our ISAPI DLL. There is some cool features, though, on our ISAPI DLL where we can get statistics. So I can put in statistics. I can put in, on the ISAPI DLL, I can get a return of statistics. So I can see how many bytes I've transferred back and forth, what level of compression I've had, who's the last person that synced, if they sync successfully or not. And that's all available by going to through our HTTP webpage and having a diag diagnostics that will come up and tell me and give me all that information. So we showed this connectivity wizard. The last thing to talk about is schedule and licensing. So the good thing is that our licensing is the same as it was in all previous releases. So it's still free redistributable on the device. The only thing you'd pay for is if you're going to sync the SQL Server, you need to have the appropriate CAL or CPU license. Same model as if you're on a desktop or notebook. Our schedule is that as you can see, there's a lot of tight integration both with Visual Studio 2005 and SQL Server 2005. So our ship schedule is dictated by those guys. So we ship when they ship. So it has its benefits and it has its negatives. Obviously, the negatives are that we kind of get pushed out when they get pushed out. But right now, the first beta for Visual Studio 2005 will be June of this year, along with SQL Server 2005. Another beta, which they're off one, because this will be the second beta of SQL Server 2005 and the first beta of Visual Studio 2005. They'll each have another beta in the second half of this year. And their new schedule now is that they'll RTM in the first half of 2005. Both these products ship together because there's features that they have that interrelate to each other. And obviously, we're kind of tied into that whole thing with both integration on both of those guys. So with that, there's not a session after me, so I can answer some questions if anyone has any questions. Question?
Why would we want to use tablet? Why would we want to use the mobile server rather than just using MSDE?
The question is why would you want to use SQL Mobile or MSDE on a tablet PC? And the scenario that customers have come back to us for that they want to use SQL Mobile on a tablet PC is when they have Pocket PC apps and smartphone apps that they also want to run and have the identical behavior on a tablet PC. So they want to have one deployment package that can go to all of them for their database and have the same behavior. You know, there's just big differences between MSDE and SQL Mobile. MSDE is out of proc, SQL Mobile is in proc. MSDE has stored procs and triggers, has a much bigger footprint. You know, it's like a 30 meg compressed install, whereas we're 1.5 meg and you can go off a cab file. So that's the primary reason. If you're just going to be a tablet PC user and that's your mobile experience, and you're never going to be going to something that's on, down to a device like a smartphone or an embedded device, then by all means, you probably want to go maybe with a more robust database engine. But the thing is here is that scenario where there's enterprise customers where they have both tablet PCs and Pocket PCs that need that access that same database. They want to have the same sync behavior. They want to go through the same IIS box, and they want to have that. And that's the primary motivation that we had that because we had a lot of customers asking, saying, hey, I have tablet PCs and I have Pocket PCs and I want to have that same behavior. So that's the primary reason for that. Question? The question is can you partition by username? And the answer is yes. It's not something you can partition off what we call S username, and this is something that's just generally available with merge replication. And that will take the username of the authenticated user on that box, and you can pass that up. And then as long as you have that information in the database schema somewhere, it will subset off that data. There was an option on the publication wizard that I went by and I said I didn't want to do anything, and that was called filtering. On that filtering is where I would define how I want to filter that data out, and that's what we call dynamic horizontal partitioning. So in your instance, each user would come in, and we had that host name variable that we had in that sample code that was generated for us. I would change it to S username variable and pass in the username. So in my instance, it would be Redmond/KevinCOL, and then all the rows that have that value would get partitioned down to my device. So everyone's schema would be identical, but each user would have their own individual data. If you didn't want to do that, what we see is more people having like a route number or a sales user ID, and they sync off that. So I come in and I have like Kraft Nabisco, they have a route number for each truck delivery. They'll key that information in and it'll just bring down that subset of data. So we see more of people using host name and syncing and filtering off that than we do off S username, but you can use S username if you want to and go off of an authenticated username. Question right in the front here. Excuse me, can you say that one more time? The question is can SQL Mobile sync up with Oracle? So right today, in the existing product right now, if you wanted to get to Oracle and use our sync, you'd have to have like XML, like that diagram that I had back with Nevalon. That Nevalon app was using DTS to get data from Oracle into SQL Server, and then that data would flow down. In SQL Server 2005, there will be transactional replication support to Oracle databases. So that's a feature that's going to be in SQL Server 2005. So with that, you can have a transactional the Oracle database would be a transactional publication. The SQL Server 2005 would be a transactional subscriber. You would then set up a merge publication database on that same SQL Server 2005 database, and that would sync down to SQL Mobile. So that's the way that you could go to Oracle. But that's the only direct support that they're supporting through synchronization with SQL Server 2005. They don't have anything going to DB2 or other data sources yet. So if you really wanted to get data down and you didn't need the track changes, your fastest mechanism is to use the new DTS features where you can just bring that data down. So any OLEDB provider that's available, you're going to be able to use that as a source through DTS and then bring that data down. There's another question right behind you. Is the Pocket PC version of SQL Mobile in proc? Yes. The question is SQL Mobile in proc for tablet PC? And the answer is yes. It's the exact same thing that you have on the devices. It's just compiled to run on x86. So it's identical behavior. Question? The question is how do we do multi-user or locking? The question is this is more of a technical one, so I'll just hit it briefly and you can come up afterwards if you want to get the technical. But we have a shared memory pool that we have. So we're in process and we have a shared memory pool, and that's how we do our locking, because that's the primitives that we have on WindowsCE.net to be able to do that. So we take that same primitive up and use it on tablet PC. Question? The question was when I created a subscriber database on the desktop, can I take that database and move it over to an SDE and put it onto a Pocket PC or smartphone device? And the answer is yes. It's the same file format regardless if I create it on Win32 or if I create it on the device. And this is one scenario where people can use for deployment. So if they just want to go and automate, because everything you do in SQL Workbench you can script out and automate. So you could put this scripted out and then automate it and then have it as a task that a user could click and then create these databases. I tend to think that developers and ISVs are going to want to go more the Visual Studio 2005 route to create an application to deploy those things on the desktop and then put them on SD card readers. But that's a primary thing. Outside of the fact that I can manipulate and move the data around on my desktop. I could easily have done this through an ActiveSync connection, but that's not like anything really cool to people because everyone does everything on ActiveSync. So that's why I wanted to focus more on, I got everything running on the desktop. The question is what can you do with the release today? The version of Visual Studio 2005 that you have today has very limited functionality in it in terms of how it's integrated in with what I showed here. Like, you won't be able to drag tables over. So what you will be able to do is you should be able to get to the Explorer window with the Northwinds database that ships with Visual Studio 2005. There's a Northwind SDF file that I was referencing here when I created the relationships. You should be able to get to the Server Explorer, but the automation of dragging and dropping the table isn't in the build that you have. Yeah, that's all part of that whole wizard where I drag the table over. So I just got that built on Friday at about 10 a.m. last Friday. So I was so excited I want to show you guys, but it's just when a refresh build comes out, which will probably be their beta in June, that's when you'll have the much more stable functionality than what I have. Question in the back? Yes? The question is how do we do encryption? We do not. The question is how do we do encryption and where do we store the encryption key? Oh. Oh, I didn't see that on the schedule. Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. The key that we store, we don't store in the database. We create it from a variety of things that I can't disclose because that would give out information. But there's no way that the key is reproducible. So the only people that know is like Russia and France because they have to get our encryption algorithm. But there's no way that outside of dictionary attack that anyone's going to be able to hack into the database. So please fill out your forms. Sorry that we ended abruptly here, and thanks for coming.